Good morning, everybody, and happy Monday morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. Welcome to our fourth video series or webinar series for this course. And today, for some reason, we are quite few, but I can see that people are joining, and I hope that we shall make a good quorum. And before we begin this series or this webinar for today, I would like us to just maybe go to, I'll ask three people. I'll ask three people. If you have any questions or concerns or any anything that you may have learned last week that was interesting that you would like to share with the rest of us, maybe you can raise up your hand and we can have 3 questions or comments. You can also write them down in chat. Is anybody wanting to share or to ask a question? Okay, great. Seems that there is no one wanting to share at this time, but you are free to do that as we go along. So I will start by sharing my screen so that we can start. So as I have said, this is webinar series number 4 in our course, and I'm hoping that we are going and getting along well in the course. I've seen that people have reported that they have finished the module 3, and some were asking in the middle of the week when module 4 would be open. Remember that modules are always opened on a Sunday so that we can keep people going at the same pace. So it allows enough time for those who may not have had enough a chance during the week to open up the module and to catch up with everybody. So Sunday is when the modules are opened up. Kindly also, I have seen queries on the WhatsApp about somebody asking, please help me to open my modules and so on. Your module will open when you complete one module and do the exercises. Then it allows you to move to the next module. So fellow participants or technical advisor would not be able to do that for you. But if you are having a technical issue, you have completed everything and you're not able to get to the next module and yet it is open, then always feel free to reach out to Sandy and she will be able to deal with it. So thank you very much. Let us go and let us start with this series. We are looking today at gender analysis tools and frameworks. Now, I will say that this is quite an interesting unit because it helps you to start to think of how do we understand the roles and the dynamics that we have talked about in the first 3 modules, where we are trying to say that there is a disadvantage, there is a discrimination, there is power. Some people have it, some people don't have it, and there are stereotypes. But these are things that we just say. How do we ensure that we actually have the proof and the data to show that, yes, there is discrimination, yes, there is disadvantage? And so that is where gender analysis tools and frameworks comes in. Now, you will go through the module and you will see the different types of tools and frameworks. And these tools and frameworks will help you to understand that not one tool or not one framework fits for everything, but that they are used in different places and at different times and for different participants in order to understand the lives and the experiences of these people, and in order to understand whether it is a certain problem in the community or it is an organization wanting to see how gender sensitive it is. There are different tools and frameworks for each of these, which I will not go into because of our time. But what we are going to do in this session is just simply to try to understand what is gender analysis and what are some of the key concepts that are in gender analysis. So to begin, we are looking at what is gender analysis. when we are saying that we have tools and frameworks, what are they being used for? So gender analysis is a systematic inquiry. We want to identify certain things. We want to be sure of certain things. So one of these things that we want to be sure of is what are the major areas of gender-based inequality, discrimination, and exclusion. As I have said, if we talk about violation of human rights, but we don't have data, we don't have information, we don't have the experiences and stories of people to tell us what it is, then we only have speculations. So gender analysis helps us to see what are the major areas of inequality. Secondly, gender-based analysis or gender analysis helps us to see specific challenges and constraints. A community may be facing, for example, a community may be facing lack of water. Now, when we say that this community lacks water, what are the major challenges and constraints if, for example, a borehole was dug in that community? That might bring them water, but will it add to the work that people have? Do they have to maintain the water pump? Who will be responsible for maintaining the water pump? If the water pump can only be maintained, for example, by men, that is a job that is given to men. What about when a woman wants to go to the borehole and there are no men around to help to operate the water pump? So what specific challenges and constraints that are based on gender will come as a result of any interventions or that already exists in a community? And then we look at the actions that are needed to address them. If a community has identified a major area of gender-based inequality, if there are challenges and constraints to that, then we need to also look at the actions that are needed to address them. So when you go into looking at the gender-based tools analysis, the gender analysis tools and frameworks, you're going to be able to see that they deal with a challenge, they deal with an inequality, an area that is felt to be a challenge. And then they also take one through the process or the steps of trying to address those challenges or trying to understand them a little bit more. But then we have to ask ourselves, when we are saying gender tools, gender analysis, gender tools and frameworks, what do we mean by gender analysis, tools and frameworks? Now, I want us to look at the picture in the slide. When a house is being built, when the walls are going up, it cannot stand on its own. And so usually there are supports that are put to help the builders so that the walls don't come crashing down until they have put all the items and supports in place. So you will usually see, like in this building, you will see that it has metal supports that are going all around it. And so these metal supports are what we can call frameworks. So a framework is a way of supporting something that you are doing. So when you are done with the analysis, you're able to understand a little bit better the whole picture of how the issue or the situation is. And that is like a finished house. The diagram, the house on the right was made from the framework on the left. And so the finished part shows you a whole idea of what the thing is going to look at the end. It helps to understand in totality what the finished product is going to be. And so when we think also about building of a house, we're saying that you need the supports, you need the framework in order to help it not fall down before it is complete. But then the builders also use certain tools. They're going to be using hammers, they're going to be using saws, they're going to be using tools that help them to build that house. And so a framework is a support, but you need tools and different tools depending on what you're doing, because you cannot use a hammer and a saw for the same thing. A hammer is supposed to drive nails in. A saw is supposed to maybe cut a piece of wood in half. The tools cannot be interchanged. And so therefore, the gender analysis uses different tools in order to be able to understand what inequalities are, what challenges are there, and what actions can be taken. So the gender analysis tool is a process and is a strategy for conducting a gender analysis. In other words, it is what you use. How do we move from step 1 to step 2 to step 3? Then the gender analysis framework is the structure that you use for organizing the information about gender roles and relations. So a gender analysis framework uses certain tools. And when we go into the module, you will be able to see this. For example, we have a framework that is called the Harvard Analytical Framework. Harvard Analytical Framework is a framework that was developed to try to understand the differences in roles and relations between men and women. And it mainly focuses on what do men do and what do women do. One of the ways in which the Harvard Analytical Framework tries to look at this is by looking at a 24-hour activity. It has a tool called the 24-hour activity, which means it looks at in the same household, what do men do over a 24-hour period? What do women do over a 24-hour period? What are the challenges and differences between the way in which women work in a 24-hour period and men work in a 24-hour period? Because then it helps to understand if we were to have a development intervention where we require people maybe to come for capacity building training. If we look at the way women are occupied in 24 hours and men are occupied in 24 hours, we are able to see what is the best time to have this training. What is the time when, if we have a training, only women will come because maybe the men are busy in the fields, or only men will come because the women are busy taking care of the household. So the tools that are used in that help us to understand the Harvard Analytical Framework. And as I've said, when you go into the module, you'll be able to see that we have different frameworks, and each of these frameworks has got different tools for understanding inequality, for understanding challenges, and for seeing what action can be taken. So let us go now into some of the key concepts that you will find are mainly across the tools. So I have selected concepts or ideas that are common to most of the tools. Now, I want us to look at this diagram, but before we look at it, let us look at the explanation. Now, this diagram is on the 4 factors of production. Now, there are 4 factors of production in general. Factor 1 is labor, that is people and their work. Factor 2 is land. Factor 3 is capital, being able to have certain things that you can input into the land in which you work. And factor 4 is entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship is a general term for being able to make money out of what you have produced. So in terms of the factors of production, we talk about that people put in labor, whether it is in land, whether it is in an organization, people put in that labor. And they put in that labor in order to be able to work in a certain area. If it is farming, we've said it is land. If it is an organization, maybe they're working with files and they're working on computers and they're working with projects. But then the capital that is needed to be infused into that is what helps then to drive the operations or the processes. And then out of that, people are able to make a living either by running a business, by selling crops, or by being a professional with a career. So all of these factors, of the 4 factors of production, are important. Now let us look at the concept access and control. Access is an opportunity to make use of a resource. So the resource that you have is the land, for example, in our picture. Control is having the power to decide how a resource is used and who has access to it. So we are saying that there are 2 important aspects here. One is access. Can you make use of an opportunity? I mean, do you have the opportunity to make use of a resource? Or do you have the power to decide how that resource is used? Now, I want us to think about these 4 factors of production that we are looking. And we ask ourselves the question in the analytical framework: which of these factors of production are gendered in your community? And who does what kind of work? Now, different communities will have different answers to this. In some communities, the factors of production are gendered, especially when it comes to land. In many communities, women have access to land. What does that mean? They till the land, they plant, they harvest crops. That means that they are able to get to the land and use the land. So here we are saying that access is opportunity to make use of a resource. It means that if the resource there that is land in this farming community, women in many communities are able to go into the land, plant, till, harvest crops, water crops. They are able to make use of that resource. Now, control is having the power to decide how a resource is used. And so in many instances, in many communities, women do not own the land. They do not therefore have a voice in deciding what crops are grown. So we are saying that, excuse me. In other words, we are saying that they are using the land, but they do not have a voice in deciding what crops are grown. They do not have a voice in how the money that comes from those crops will be spent. And they do not have any access to banks, for example, so that they can obtain capital. So that means that the women are left out of the most important aspect, which is the control over the land that they are farming in. And so we say that the factors of production that are gendered in a community is, for example, land, where women are able to access it, but they do not control it. We know that in many communities, women do not inherit land. And that means that if a woman and if a man and a woman are living on a piece of land and that man dies, sometimes in some communities, that land goes back to the family. And so this woman is left a widow and she's left completely landless. If that was the only source of income, it means that she is now completely destitute. She has no way in which to be able to make a living for herself and her children. And so the control over the factors of production is very, very critical to understanding how is a development intervention supposed to be done. Do we sensitize participants on the fact that when women do not have control over the land, then they are not able to grow crops and sell them? That means that they are no longer in control of their own income and they become dependent. When women are dependent, it means that the society as a whole, the living of standard in that society goes down because not everybody is productive. So therefore, when we talk about access and control and who does what, it is important to remember that if there is an aspect where people are providing only labor but are not able to access capital, then they are not going to be able to develop. That is the first concept. Now, if we look at the next concept, we talk about something called condition and position. Now, when we are measuring condition and position, when we are, Michaela, please mute. Michaela, thank you. When we are looking at the concept of condition and position, excuse me, we are talking about something versus something else. When you are looking, Tokozire, Madalitzo, Michaela, can you please kindly mute yourselves? Oh, Michaela is muted. Thank you so much, people, for muting immediately you come on. When we are talking about condition and position, we are talking about women versus men. And so the measure that has been set for condition and position in a society is because of the relative advantage of men. Where are men usually in the society? If we perceive that they are usually higher up, then we measure the condition and position of women against that. So now, if we look at this slide, it talks about condition, which is the immediate material circumstances in which men and women live related to their gender roles and positions. In other words, where am I in terms of how am I in terms of poverty? How am I in terms of housing? How am I in terms of ability to acquire food in relation to the men in my society? In other words, I have certain gender roles and certain gender responsibilities. Do these gender roles and responsibilities disadvantage me as a woman so that I am facing these challenges of getting food, of getting proper shelter, of getting an income? But the men in the society, where are they in terms of that? So condition is measured, as I've said, against the position of men in society, which means that in some societies, you will find that the condition of women is better than the condition of men. And in some societies, the condition of women is worse than that of men. And then also, we cannot generalize. Maybe in terms of income, women do not have as much income as men, but maybe they are more food secure. Maybe they have better shelter. And so it is always important that this idea of condition is that the material circumstances in which women live and in which men live is measured to see what are the different conditions that we are measuring and what can we conclude as a whole about the disadvantage that women face in a relative position to men. Then the position that we are talking about is women's social and economic standing in society relative to men. Now, the standing that we are saying is related to status. Economically and socially, what is the status of women in the society? A woman may have an income, but is she considered it's the same status as the men in her society? Or is this income attributed to the men in the society? Where somebody says, oh, you only have that because you have a rich husband or your family is wealthy. But you as a woman, it is your hard work and your effort may not be recognized. So when we talk about position, we are talking about status. And when this status is stereotyped or or there is discrimination, it means that women's position is not felt to be as important as men's position. And we then say that when we have to improve the position of women, then it requires removing of systematic barriers to removing their strategic gender needs. We're going to see what these strategic gender needs are. But I want us to remember as we move that when we are talking about condition can be easily improved by, for example, supplying clean drinking water, showing people how to grow crops so that they are food sufficient, or ensuring that people have avenues for selling their crops or selling or opening a business so that their condition can immediately improve. If they are not able to meet their healthcare needs, then it is easy to say, let us set up a hospital, let us have drugs, let us ensure that mothers who come in for prenatal are able to get the vitamins that they need. It changes condition. But we're going to see that improvement of position requires removing of systematic barriers. Now, before we move into position, into strategic and practical gender needs, let us look at the concept of work and responsibilities. We have three types of work, and you're going to see these in the gender tools and frameworks, that they look and measure three different types of work. Now, before we go into the explanation, look at the picture on the right. And we are saying that the Eurostats has released these statistics that say that the main professions that are split against gender lines, where we have men and women, 97% of builders are men, 96% of drivers and mobile plant operators are men, 74%, 83%, these are people that are in science and engineering, whether as technicians or professionals. Now, when it comes to people who are personal carers, groomers, hairdressers, manicurists, and so on, 89% of them are women. 84% of women are cleaners, office clerks, health technicians, and teachers. So the balance or the imbalance here is where we talk about how is this work valued? As we have said, in position, what is women's social and economic standing in society in relation to men? And we are going to see that when we are talking about work and responsibilities, that is where position comes in. Now, I want us to look at productive work. Productive work does to produce goods or services for income or subsistence. When I am farming, I am doing productive work. When I go to the office and do work, then that is also productive work. When I run a business that is bringing an income, that is productive work. Reproductive work is done to care and maintain the household. It is normally unpaid, it is mostly invisible, and it is continuous. Children are not going to stop feeling hungry because they ate yesterday. So you say, oh, okay, that's it for the rest of the week. We don't have to cook any food. Or the house is not going to stop getting dirty because it was cleaned yesterday. And so that kind of work is continuous. And now if we go back to productive work, it is very easily recognized. When somebody asks you, what is your job? I am a farmer, I am a teacher, I am a carpenter. Very easy to see. But it is usually more recognized in society. Both men and women do productive work, but usually both of it is not valued in the same way. And sometimes when we talk about reproductive work, because it is mostly done by women, it is normally undervalued. And the undervalue usually comes because it is normally unpaid. Women do the work for the households, but it is not paid for, they're not paid for it. Now, community work is all community activities that household members engage in. It can be religious ceremonies, it can be public meetings, it can be communal labor. Now, in the old days, women worked in reproductive roles. Women worked in those reproductive roles were also extended to community roles, so that if there was a gathering, then the work that they are doing within the household is the same work they're doing within that community gathering, taking care of everybody's children, making sure everybody's fed and so on. The men, as the heads of the households, were also the decision makers in communities. Nowadays, there is some fluidity to this, but usually tasks are assigned to men and women according to gender norms and cultural expectations. So that when you have a religious ceremony, when you have a cultural ceremony, a marriage, a burial, a birth, there are things that are done within the community, but they are still extremely gendered. Now, what I want us to say in this is that again, referring to the old days, the work that women did is what has built many empires in this world today. I want you to look at clothing, for example. Clothing and providing clothes for the family was something that women did. They would weave the fabric, they would make the clothes, they would do it for their families. Nowadays, when you look at designers, they are designing clothes outside, earning billions and billions. When you think about designer clothes that are too expensive for most people to afford, this is work that women did in the family. If you look at food chains, where we go out and buy food, food is something that women provided in the family. This has been taken out of the home and made into multi-billion empires. Now, it means that the clothing, the feeding the family, these are things that were once considered women's work, that was considered undervalued and underpaid. But now it is that when you want to go and eat, maybe you're trying to celebrate something, and you will say, I want to go out and eat in a fancy restaurant. That is actually work that was done by women, but has been taken out of the realm of reproductive work, and now it is put in the realm of productive work. So it means that while the position of where do we put the food industry, where do we put the clothing industry has changed, but the work that women still do at home, cooking, cleaning, providing for the family, is still undervalued and underpaid. Okay, now I want us to look at this as a question for everybody. We're going to look at sex disaggregated data. And sex disaggregated data is cross-classified by sex. So it presents information separately for women and men, for girls and boys. It means that when we are collecting information, we want to know how many women, how many men, what are the men doing, what are the women doing. Now, the question I'd like us to just pause for a while and see is, why is it important to disaggregate data? So, oops, sorry, I'm already going to, I would like us to ask the question, why is it important to disaggregate data by sex? And maybe we can have just 2 or 3 responses from the participants. Why is it important that we have data that is presented separately for women and men and for girls and boys, or for women and girls and then boys and men? Why is this important? You can unmute yourself, raise your hand and answer. Mariam?
Hi, I'm Mariam from Kenya. I think they should separate, because most of the time you find women, if we are employed in one company, you find that women are underpaid, yet men are overpaid. Yet we are doing the same kind of job, either in the field or at home as domestic help. You find that men are looked in some way, yet women are neglected, or they are not valued, yet the service we are giving is the same. That's my thoughts.
Okay, so how would having sex disaggregated data help us in this in that situation? Maria, how do you think that having sex disaggregated data about employees and their salaries, or about the work that people do, would be able to help us to solve a problem? Mariam is quiet. Maybe we can move to George. George, would you like to contribute?
Yes, hello.
Go ahead.
Yes, I think the best reason is just to understand how many have participated or are participating in a particular activity, so that you understand or be able to make a decision pertaining to the number of people who have participated in that particular activity. For instance, if you are doing a distribution of aid, you need to understand how many have come to take the aid that you are giving out. And also you'll be able to understand that that particular aid that you are providing, how many are men and how many are female, and what's the implication on the people who have received. Thanks very much. Over.
Thank you very much, George. And yes, I like the part where you finish by saying that it is to understand that, okay, we have been able to give out some support to people. Who are they? And then if there are differences, what does it mean? What do these differences tell us? Okay, thank you. Kaweko, go ahead.
Thank you for this. Just I think the most important thing of segregating data is to compare. For instance, if you talk of salaries in a maybe textile industry, what's the highest? Yes, okay. What's the
Sorry, Kaweko, there is some interference.
Okay, so
Go
basically,
ahead.
what I was saying is that the main reason for disaggregating data is to make a comparison between these two sexes, the male and the female.
Okay.
Given an example of salaries in maybe in a textile industry.
Thank you.
Yeah. So
yeah.
that.
Okay, thank you to help us to understand differences. Thank you very much. Now, the next person I want to ask has I don't know how to say your name because I think it is one WDSS. I don't know whether that is a name. So please go ahead. Maybe you tell us your name. Okay, Mwarinda.
Yes, hello.
Yes, please.
I am Warinda from Kenya. I think the reason why it is important to disaggregate data by sex is because different sexes have different needs. Even if it's in the same area, but they have different needs according to I don't know if I can get into biology right now, but according to their the bodily, like how they're able to what is it called? How they are able to handle things. Like we have there's a difference between people who are more masculine and people who are more feminine. So without get much words, I think it's because of the differences.
Okay, so okay, thank you very much. We'll just have one last one. Anthony, you can go ahead. Anthony?
Sorry, I forgot to
You
unmute.
forgot. Okay,
Yeah,
go ahead.
my understanding is that we disaggregate data because we want to know which group of people are getting what and why, which resources, which challenges, and how can we address the challenges, why this group is getting little and why this group is getting more. So the numbers helps us to plan and the programming.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, everybody, for your participation. Your ideas are correct in that we are using sex disaggregated data in order to be able to understand the needs of men and women. And so, slideshow. Just a minute, I have to, my slideshow has decided to lock up. Sorry, my presentation has has frozen. So I want to just go back to it. Just closed it. I'm trying to reopen it. Okay, sorry for that. So we are looking at your answers in terms of why sex disaggregated data is important. And one of the things that has been raised is that the needs of men and women, boys and girls are not the same. So when we are looking at sex disaggregated data, it is telling us that we are recognizing that these people have different needs and they have therefore different requirements from a program or from an organization, from their work requirements, from their ambitions are maybe a little bit different. So their needs are not the same. And I think it was Juanita mentioned, even the biology of men and women are not the same. If we are doing the same tasks, normally it is known that men are more muscular, and therefore they may be able to move something that is heavier, to open something that is a little bit more, tightly closed, or in order to be able to do things that require muscle strength. But it is also important to understand that women are usually able to go on a task for a little longer than men would do, because they are not expending as much muscular energy as the men are expending. And so their needs in terms of the work that they do may be different. And so depending on the work, because again, it does not go for all work, but their needs may be different. And so we need to have sex disaggregated data of, if we are trying to implement something, how many women is it going to involve? How many men is it going to involve? Then they also face different social, economic, and cultural barriers, which affect their access and benefit from resources, services, and programs equitably. If we are all for example, we are in a savings group, and in the savings group, everybody is expected to contribute a certain amount of money. If I do not have access to economic assets, then I will not be able to participate fully in that. If, for example, I have to ask my husband for the money, and he also is in the same group, it means that he's producing twice the amount of money that he would normally be producing if I had access to economic assets. If there are cultural barriers that prevent me, for example, from raising my voice in a meeting and talking about my concerns, then it's important that any meetings that are to be held, they probably would need to have, in a community, sometimes we have to have separate meetings for men and women, where women raise their issues, men raise their issues, because men may not want to speak out in front of women because of certain ways in which they want to be perceived. They don't want maybe to discuss their problems, or they don't want to be seen as weak. Women may not have the cultural opportunities to speak up in that meeting. And so if we have sex disaggregated data that tells us, okay, we have had 2 meetings. In these meetings, we've had 30 people speaking, but in every single meeting, all these 30 people have been men. Then we start to say, okay, perhaps there's an issue here. We maybe need to have a separate meeting with the women and find out what their issues are, because culture may not be allowing them to speak up in the meeting. Then thirdly, it is an important part of every gender analysis. Sex disaggregated data is an important part, but I'm also going to add and say it is the first step in a gender analysis. In other words, sex disaggregated data does not tell us anything much. It just simply tells us number of men, number of women, number of girls, number of boys. But as one of the speakers said, it helps us to understand the issues that are then arising. If I love the example of the distribution of food. If we are distributing maybe, for example, food after a humanitarian disaster, and only one gender is coming for the food, we are not sure of whether that food is reaching the other gender. If only women are coming for the food, how is this food being distributed within the family? If only men are coming for the food, how is this food being distributed within the family? We are able to use the data we have to understand what it means, but sex disaggregated data is only the first step. So it is a powerful tool to identify quantifiable differences between men and women, because it helps us to do what? To address the gender issues. But if you only have the sex disaggregated data, if you only say, okay, we had 34 men in this training and we had 25 women in this training, and then we say, okay, there were fewer women than men, the question would be, so what? That is not a problem, that there were fewer women. But we need to be able to understand that if we know that in this organization, for example, we know that maybe there are more men than women, that then means that automatically, if we have a representation of the organization, normally the meetings would have more men than women. But if we know the opposite, if, for example, we know that there are more women than men in an organization, but every time we have a meeting, there are very few women, then we will ask ourselves the question, what is going on here? Because as if we're sampling them for a meeting, then that means that there should ideally be more women because there are more in that organization. So it helps us to address gender issues, but the data in itself are just figures. They are just quantifiable figures. We have to use them to do something. So without sex disaggregated data, vital information is missed about existing difference between girls, boys, men, and women. If we don't have this data, we cannot understand. And so therefore, it is important to have it. If you have statistics, if you go into a lot of the statistics that are collected by organizations, that are collected even sometimes by governments, and they say that we have, let's say that we said we have a population of 30 million in our country. How does this impact on services that are to be offered? Unless we understand how many women do we have, how many men do we have? And that is why you will find that, for example, census data, it will usually be talking about children between the age of 0 to 5, children between the age of 5 maybe to 13, 13 to 18, 18 to 24, and so on and so forth. How does this help? This is disaggregated data that says that we have maybe 2 million children under the age of 5. It means that it now has implications for who is going to school, how many schools do we build, who needs food assistance in the school so that they can come to school. And then we break it down and say, how many girls were born? Are they going into school? How many boys were born? Are they going into school? So sex disaggregated data helps us not to miss vital information. Now, we have looked at different concepts that have to do with gender analysis tools and frameworks. Now, these concepts are going to help you to understand the gender tools and frameworks that you're going to meet in this module. You're going to look at the Harvard Analytical Framework, for example, gender analysis matrix, gender audit. When I say some of these names, if you have not interacted with gender analysis tools, they sound just like names. But with the understanding of the concepts that are found in each of these tools and frameworks, you will be able to go through the tools and frameworks in a much easier fashion. So I want to stop my presentation here and say that gender analysis tools and frameworks are important to understand because they help us to know what are the real issues that people are facing. When you go into a community and find out about the access, the control, about the factors of production and who is able to access these factors of production. When you're able to find out how many men and how many women are being affected by a certain issue or problem, then you are able to develop a framework to sort out this issue or to sort out this problem. So I want to say thank you very much, and I want to leave you with my usual last slide. Now, this is a slide that is provocative. Now, this is Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Ruth Bader Ginsburg is now the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and she was the first Jewish woman and the only second woman to serve in the US Supreme Court. Now, the Supreme Court, she was appointed in 1993. Now, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I want you to understand two aspects: the first Jewish woman and the second woman. Now, the Jews are usually face aspects of discrimination. So for her to be able to get that education that she had and rise all the way to the top of the US Supreme Court, it means that she had to overcome a lot of barriers along the way. She also had to overcome the barriers of being a woman in the field of law. And she overcame these barriers to rise to serve in the US Supreme Court in 1993. Now, there have been only 3 women in the US Supreme Court in its 203 years of existence. Now, I want you to get that point. The US Supreme Court has existed for 203 years. And in that time, there have been only 3 women in 8 years of existence. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg was the second woman to serve in the US Supreme Court. when she retired, when she passed away, one more woman was appointed. Now, the slide that we have here, she says, I'm sometimes asked, when will there be enough? And my answer is, when there are 9. People are shocked, but there had been 9 men and nobody ever raised a question about that. What is Ruth talking about? She's talking about the fact that 9 judges sit on the bench of the US Supreme Court, just 9. And so when she says, people are shocked when she says that there are 9, there should be 9 women on the bench. And she says, but people were never shocked when there were 9 men on the bench. So why should it be a shock when we say that there should be 9 women on the bench? And Ruth Ginsburg's words may be coming true, because currently there are 4 women on the US Supreme Court bench and 4 men. And so therefore, they have achieved an equal number of men and women on the bench. And this is where I want us to finish off, that sometimes progress looks like it is never coming. Sometimes change looks like it is never coming. 203 years of existence of the Supreme Court and only 3 women. And now there are 4 women on the bench and 4 men on the bench. So progress has come. And so when you're working and you're looking at the work that you do, especially for those of us who work in the gender field, sometimes change looks like it is not coming, but there is always change that is coming. So I want to thank you so much for I want to thank you so much for participating. And so I also want to thank those who have been on chat, because I can see that a lot of people have put in their contribution on sex disaggregated data. And I want to thank you so much for that. So I want to say also, ladies and gentlemen, kindly continue learning, continue going through the modules, and I hope that we shall see you next week. Goodbye to everyone.
Bye.
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 Bye. Bye. Bye. Bye.